right, good afternoon. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch, but I also hope that we'll be able to ward off the early afternoon food coma by talking about some JavaScript and some issues that we might be having around JavaScript. So my name is Becca. I traveled here from Chicago, Illinois. This is my first time in Richmond, so far I'm enjoying the community here and getting to see the city a little bit. So, thank you. I work at a company called Eighthlight, and Eighthlight is a software consulting company that helps people and companies to build better software, basically. As I am traveling for this conference, I should probably pitch that we have offices in Chicago, New York, LA, London, and most recently, Madison, Wisconsin. So feel free to come talk to me if you would like to know about what we do at any of those offices. I would love to talk to you more about my company. So a little bit of background about me before I get started. Now, I have been working in tech for about three and a half years now. So I'm still kind of new at this, but I got the idea for this talk when I became a JavaScript therapist. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been a JavaScript therapist, but it happened to me like this. I was talking to a new client and I was pitching an idea for what they should do for their website, and they didn't end up hiring me to fix their website. But what they did do is they said, can I call you for like an hour every week and then just tell you about all these problems that I'm having? So they did. They called me for an hour every week and we talked about the JavaScript problems they were having. And my entire job was basically to sit on the phone and be like, oh, I'm so sorry, that sounds terrible. Oh man, you had to add another library? Really? Oh, that sucks. And that was the entirety of my job. I didn't teach them to write JavaScript, but I basically was able to commiserate with the experience of doing something that is sometimes really hard. So a little bit more background about me. So I first learned JavaScript when I was teaching elementary music in a town in western Guatemala, which is a bit unconventional, I know. But when I first learned JavaScript, I was living in a place where most of the time I couldn't remember how to order coffee in Spanish. And the world didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was having a lot of struggles with the American education system and just wanted to figure out what my calling was in life. And at the time, being able to build really simple applications and build tests and make them pass and see my screen turn green and being like, oh my gosh, I did it. I fixed this problem. That felt really, really good to me. And I was like, oh, finally, something that I can understand, something that is simple, it makes sense, and I can always do it the same way. So fast forward a couple of years, I came back to the United States. I went to Dev Bootcamp, which was a intensive training program where I basically learned to be a software developer. And after I went to Dev Bootcamp, I got a job at Eighthlight and I was an apprentice. And if you want to know more about apprenticeship, I would be happy to have a long conversation about what is great about apprenticeship and what I learned from having some time where I was dedicated to working with mentors and just learning how to do this well. But after I finished my apprenticeship and started working with real clients on real-world situations, I learned that this JavaScript that I first learned looks a lot more like this. So you might recognize a few of these tools, but a lot of the projects that I worked on were like this interconnectedness of tools and libraries and frameworks. and they switch quite a bit. Every month, it seems, we decide that one of these is not cool anymore, and we start using another one. And especially for people like me, for consultants, for team switchers, for freelancers, or for beginners who are not able to make heads or tails of any of this, this can be intimidating. So I am here to tell you, well, that internet problems are real, but also that JavaScript fatigue is real. And when you are working in this field, it is very easy to get tired of learning a new thing every single week. So if you're in that place, I feel you. So also, if that's not enough, for me, add in some short projects, some long projects, some back-end APIs, some prototypes, some production applications, and you end up with 2 years of your career that looks quite a bit like this. That's a lot of JavaScript, and also a lot of Java, and Elixir, and all of the other cool new things that we're trying out right now for our back-end and front-end and full-stack applications. So this is the part where I am going to ask for a little bit of participation on your part. Now, I would like you to, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, find somebody who's sitting next to you or find a small group, and tell them about a time that you felt overwhelmed. First of all, introduce yourself if you haven't met, but then I'm assuming that if you are in this room, if you read my talk, synopsis, and you wanted to come and listen to me talk about JavaScript, then I'm guessing you also have a story to tell. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Ready? Go. So we clearly have a lot to say about that, and this is awesome that we are here in this room together and we get to talk about some things that are hard and that are overwhelming. So before we go on, does anybody have something that they thought was that stood out to them that they would like to share, either that you said or that somebody else said to you? Anybody? Yes. Yes, build tools are very overwhelming. I heard that Webpack is out now, and there's this new thing called Rollup, and I've never heard of it before. I still hadn't figured out how to write a Webpack config. All right, so first of all, I would like, if I haven't said this already, I would like to say me too. I am feeling this pain every day. A huge part of my job every day is trying to find the right tools for the job, or trying to learn the ones that already exist on the project that I'm starting on, trying to learn how to use them, and starting a new project and starting all over again. So if you are in this place, I feel your pain. I really love this tweet, and I thought it was very applicable to what I'm talking about today. I screenshotted it just to be safe. So sadly, you will miss some of my awesome GIFs that did not make it through. But anyway, when I first started exploring this subject, I assumed that this was a technical problem. And I assumed that if I just learned enough and if I researched this, I would find a tool, I would find the right tool, the right framework, the right library that would win at the end of the day. And now I know everything that there is to know, and I am set, and I'm not going to have to feel this pain anymore. I looked into web components, WebAssembly, JavaScript alternatives, microarchitecture, all of which I will talk about briefly as a part of this talk, just to talk about my learning process going through some of these tools that might be able to help us. But the more I really dug into this topic, the more I worked on teams with people who did this well or people who didn't do this so well, the more I became convinced that maybe this isn't just a technical problem. So a little bit later in this talk, we're also going to talk about some of the values that we can cultivate both in ourselves and on our teams that are going to help us to navigate this world of JavaScript. So first of all, I spent a little bit of time exploring web components, and I learned some interesting things. Web components, if you have never used them or learned about them, I'm not an expert, so I'm just going to give you the Cliff Notes version of all of this. But web components are basically components that are built with vanilla JavaScript and HTML, and you can sometimes build them with a framework like Polymer, which is a framework that Google has put out that's like a wrapper around web components. And web components are components that you can use in any sort of JavaScript application. So, for example, a lot of advertisements that you see on websites are written using web components because a developer doesn't want to have to write the exact same components in React and Angular and Vue and Backbone and jQuery. So web components are tools that we can use to help us to make components that that are reusable in lots of different places. While web components are really interesting, they're actually not something that I've ever had the opportunity to use. I came away from my research with another tool to put in my arsenal of like, oh, this might be a good solution if I'm trying to build the same thing in multiple different frameworks. But I don't want to build an entire application in web components. So I'd better find something else that I can build an entire application in. I spent quite a bit of time drooling over microarchitecture. I heard a talk on this last year and was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing. Because at the time, I was working in a lot of Angular, and it was kind of gross Angular. And what I really wanted was a client who would let me build my feature that I'm trying to build in something that wasn't Angular. So microarchitecture is basically the practice of building different features or different parts of your application in different frameworks, and then having one application or one framework that holds it all together and will route between your different applications that you have built in different frameworks. So some of the advantages of a system like this is the fact that you're not constricted to just something old if you started your application 5 years ago. If I really want to learn Vue, and that's something that the team really wants to use, we can build a new feature in Vue, and we're not stuck with our old code. It has a lot of the same advantages that a microservice architecture has on the back end, except we're taking some of those advantages and moving them to the front end. Now, the obvious disadvantages of having an application like this is that if I want to make an update to my entire application, let's say I want to change the way that the page navigation works, or I want to change the way that my header looks, I'm going to have to change it in every part of my application, in every single framework that I use to build this application. So it has some downsides as well, and it forces me to maintain lots of different micro applications, which could result in even more context switching. But it is a great way to be able to move on and put new things in your application. So to me, this sounds really great, and I really wish that our clients with monolithic applications would write new features in something else, but for me at least, this isn't a reality, and this isn't the type of environment that I've been working in. So I learned about WebAssembly, just a little bit, because there's not a whole lot out there right now, because it is very new. So there might be some really cool things about WebAssembly in the future that will save us from some of this pain. It is really exciting to think about being able to write code in any language that I want and have it be compiled to work in my browser without having to compile it into JavaScript. But I don't think we're here yet. So on the technical side, as I was doing some of this research, I have a couple of words of caution and a couple of pieces of advice. So first of all, we don't need to do every side project ever. If you are in this place of being overwhelmed, trying to learn a bunch of new things at your job, being on a tight time constraint, all I'm saying is that perhaps we don't need to be learning the newest, greatest, coolest thing on our weekends as well. Side projects are really great for learning new things. They're great for if you want to get another job and I want to show what I can do. But as a technical community, we do not need to feel pressure to be working on them all the time because we have families and fun things that we like to do and lives outside of programming that we want to make sure that we still have time for. On that note, we also do not need to learn every new and shiny toy. I know that's already come up a couple of times today because as a community, that's probably our greatest weakness. Our desire to throw out all the old stuff and have new things come in all the time. And I have sometimes critiqued our tendency to, rather than maintaining things and improving existing tools, to just throw it out and write a new one. So as a programmer, don't feel compelled to learn every single new and shiny toy. Sometimes, if you are looking for the right tool for the job, whatever cool new thing that came out might be the right tool, but sometimes it's not. And if it's not, then don't worry about it. And also, yes. So as I have been talking to people about this talk and talking about some of this pain, they're like, but why don't you just use React? And I'm like, well, because not all of our clients and all of our companies, and we're not all using React. That's just the reality. So React is great. There are a lot of really great design patterns that I can implement in it. It's pretty easy to use, but it's not like the great beacon on a hill. It's not going to save us from everything. And not all of us are working in it all the time. So now comes the slightly controversial part of my presentation, or at least it was when I gave this presentation for my colleagues at 8th Light. So if there is one thing that full stack developers love, it is languages that compile to JavaScript. Now, there's a lot of people who love these, and I think that they're pretty cool too. But I just want to give you a word of caution, because personally, I don't think that avoiding the JavaScript ecosystem altogether is the way to solve its problems or get around some of its limitations. So if you are using one of these, if you are using Elm, Reason, ClojureScript, highly don't recommend that one. Ask yourself, is this language the best long-term choice for my client or my company? Or is it just closer to my own comfort zone? Now, in this crowd, JavaScript probably is our comfort zone. In some other crowds, people really don't like JavaScript. So just keep that in mind. So technically speaking, what should you do? Sadly, there's no magic bullet technical solution for some of these problems that we're facing. But here are a few things that I think are pretty awesome. Architecture and design patterns. Yay! This is something that I have been writing a lot about on our 8th Light blog and talking about, because I think that having good design in your applications is super important. And if you are working in lots of different languages or lots of different frameworks, if you're working in Angular and Vue and React and TypeScript and Node, you will probably start to see some similarities in the way that applications are designed and in things that are good design and things that are bad design. For example, no matter what application I'm building, I always want to make sure that I have a really good separation between any components that are presentational, that just display things, and any components that are smart components, or components that talk to our API, or that generate random numbers, or that do things that are harder to test just in isolation. Also, the DOM. Especially if you are writing front-end code, the one thing that every single JavaScript application has in common is the DOM, the way that it is rendered on the page, and the vanilla JavaScript that it is compiled into before it is rendered on the page. So as we are learning all of these new things, don't forget about all the stuff that's happening underneath. Because at the end of the day, knowing how HTML elements work, knowing how to use semantic HTML that is accessible and that is appropriate for the purpose that you are using it for, knowing some of the underlying commands that are happening when things are being added or removed or moved around on your page. That's going to help you to become a better developer. That's going to help you to debug your applications. And when things change, that's probably the one thing that's not going to change for a while. So it will be very helpful to have a good knowledge of what's going on underneath. And also, share your knowledge with other people. This is probably a given, but what I am trying to do here is to show you that I don't have to be an expert at this in order to share something that I know. So if you learn something new technically, then share it with someone else. So now what? Having the right skill set makes it easier to transfer your knowledge and experience from one tech stack to another. But when I reflect on the experience that I've had over the past couple of months especially, and the people that I have known that have done this well and that have not done it so well, the thing that really stands out to me isn't a particular technical skill sets. Sure, we've all picked up underlying programming and design principles along the way, but when I think about what success really looks like in this world of programming, especially in front-end development, here's what I see. I see agility, humility, and courage. Now, forgive me while I talk a little bit about what each of these things means for me. So when I talk about agility, I'm not necessarily talking about capital A agile. I'm not talking about one specific set of project management strategies. But what I'm talking about is agile with a lowercase a. I'm talking about the mindset that you can develop over the course of your career. You see, I got pretty lucky in this respect. I told you a little bit earlier about how at 8th Light we have an apprenticeship program where I got to spend the first 6 months of my programming career learning lots of different things. And throughout those 6 months, I built applications in Ruby, Clojure, Java, Swift, JavaScript, and Haskell. Now, I'm not a technical expert in any of those, especially not Haskell. Now, but I did come through it with a confidence in my ability to learn. Being confident in my own ability to learn, as well as trying to stay open-minded and flexible as new technology comes along, helps us to weather the changing tides of JavaScript and of the programming world in general. I have another tweet that I really love. This is from one of my JavaScript heroes, who is basically telling us that she has confidence in our ability to change and to learn new things even if JavaScript itself were to go away, we're going to be able to weather this change. Humility. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and say, oh man, I'm so humble, guys. I have this one down. I know all about humility. Because actually, I don't. For the purpose of this talk, we're going to define humility as the ability to say, I don't know. Because this might be obvious to you, but the first step of learning something new is first admitting that I don't know it. For example, I'm going to use Redux as an example, because that's something that I don't know very well, actually. So instead of saying that I don't know Redux, I might say something like this. Oh, I can't get this to work because Redux is just so complicated. Or, oh, man, this project would be so much easier if Bob hadn't added Redux. Can you believe that guy? Really? Or, why should I use a tool like Redux if I can just build it all myself? I'm pretty smart. I know about state management. I'll just do it myself, and then I won't have to worry about this tool. So, raise your hand if you've ever said one of these. I'm going to raise my hand, or something similar to it. I'm not saying that questioning our technology choices is never a good idea. It's always a good idea to have a healthy amount of skepticism as we're making decisions, as we're adding new libraries, as we're figuring out which tools to use. But more often than that, statements like this are statements that we use to protect ourselves. Because saying, I don't know, can feel very vulnerable to us. Especially if we are in a place where we're not feeling a lot of job security, or if we're in a place where we are trying to impress our new clients, and we want to make them believe that we know all of the things, and that we're awesome, and that we're going to do a great job for your team. But a lot of being the right person for the job involves being honest with ourselves and admitting our places of failure. We have to know where our weaknesses are so that we know what we need to work to improve. As developers, humility should guide our decisions about design, about which libraries to rely on, and about which resources to use. Because with humility, we can admit that perhaps somebody else saw a problem coming that we just haven't seen yet. And we can learn from the experience of someone else. I like to use this especially when I'm talking to beginners about which libraries to choose. Because as a beginner, it's really fun to write everything yourself. It's really fun to write your own HTTP clients and to write your own state management and to write your own frameworks because it's a great learning experience. But as you grow and as you mature as a developer, you learn that maybe someone else who spent years developing this tool knows something that I don't know. Maybe they saw a bug that I didn't see. So choosing to rely on a certain framework or a library is basically saying, hey, I trust this person or this group, this open source community that develops this tool. And I know that they probably know some things that I don't know. And if I find a problem with it, then rather than complaining about this tool, I'm going to submit a pull request, and I'm going to help to make it better. So here's the second participation thing. We're going to practice this. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to find a person. It could be the same person from before or a new person. And I would like you to tell them at least one thing that you don't know. I will start. I don't know how to give good feedback on my teams. Because sometimes if I am working with a person who I don't know very well, I have a hard time having that conversation. You go. All right, so for the sake of time, we're going to move on, but I definitely encourage you to have these conversations when you leave this room, to continue saying, I don't know, because that's really hard. So the last thing I'm going to talk about today is courage. Now, in this ever-changing world, it takes courage to keep showing up again and again to learn something new that you've learned before. And it takes courage to adapt when it's easier to stick with what you know. It takes courage to admit gaps in your knowledge, especially when we feel like the expectation is for us to be the experts. It takes courage to reframe the story from this is hard to I haven't figured it out yet, but I know I will. I'm very sad because I had an amazing GIF. I'm going to post these slides on Twitter later, so if you would like to check out my Twitter, I will post these slides and share them with you, and then you will see all of my amazing GIFs that I missed out. Yeah, that's a good question. Recently, I've been using tools a lot from Front-End Masters. There's a lot of great courses on there, and my company fortunately pays for a subscription, so I can use that. But also, I don't know if I have any specific strategies other than Googling, reading the docs, looking for tutorials, and a lot of what I've learned has been through doing it, through trial and error, or through jumping into a new project that somebody else already wrote and being able to look through it and see like, okay, I kind of see where the different parts are. So sometimes you just need to do it. All right, thank you very much.